Welcome to the Ultimate Coach Podcast, Conversations from Being, inspired by the book, The Ultimate Coach, written by Amy Hardison and Alan Thompson. Join us each week with the intention of expanding your state of being, and your experience will be remarkable. Remember, this is a podcast about being. It is a podcast about you. To explore more deeply, visit theultimatecoachbook.com. Now, enjoy today's conversation from Being.
Hello world. This is Ross Weitzer, still trying to figure out how to do a proper podcast introduction. For me, always the strangest part of this conversation. But welcome to the Ultimate Podcast. My guest today is Casey Gilman, and this is a really special one because in the Ultimate Coach verse, there are many people who are showing up powerfully and expressing themselves and opening themselves. And Casey Gilman is the poster child for this because he has shown up more powerfully than anybody I've met. So Casey, so grateful to be here with you.
Man, I think that was a great intro. I don't think you have anything to work
Nailed it, right?
Nailed it. Thank you. And thank you for choosing to have me on here to talk with you. It's amazing. I am blessed.
You're a big presence, man.
It's funny because, it's like I don't try to be. It's we'll probably talk about some of that, I'm sure. Plus my posts and stuff kind of, bring people up to the story of that and how that came to be. So I wasn't always, definitely not a couple months ago for sure.
You don't try to be, but you choose to be.
Yeah. Really. It kind of came down to that, like a message that Eric had sent me just about, I think it was after my very first post, and he sent me a message saying, I still was new to the group at that point, and the message said, I saw your post, and obviously I'm paraphrasing, but that I saw your post, and I know it was probably difficult to make, and I appreciate that, and I just want to give you a word of advice. And if you want to take it, take it. If you don't, that's okay. But if you come to this group and to life and you give of yourself fully and from your heart, and you also receive in that same way, that you're going to get a lot more out of this group and out of life. And, sometimes you just hear things at the right time. It's the right words at the right time, and they kind of sink in. And that's what started my journey in this group and just in this new life in general.
Can you invite us into that post that you're referring to? What was going on in your life pre, and then the context behind this post that you created that led to Eric inviting you into the fullness of who you are?
Yeah. So again, right, my memory is slightly hazy exactly which post it was. It was either my intro post, which I kind of sat on for a while, or my very first live video, which was, I felt like was a mess. It was one of those two. So it was just kind of, so what was your exact question again? Because I was trying to remember which post it was. You want to know which post it was. It was,
More so, what's more important is like, who were you before and who were you as you entered sharing yourself vulnerably in the group?
Yeah. So, man, before I was, this journey happened really fast for me. And before that, so to take you back to like the very beginning of where it started, Lindsay, my wife, got invited to the group, and she spent a few days in it figuring it out. And then every day after that, she was telling me how amazing it was. And she just kept talking about it. And I had been off Facebook for about 8 years, I think. And I was like, no, leave me alone. I don't want to join. Like, I don't want to get back on Facebook. And but she kept talking about it. Eventually, I saw a man's post, and it really spoke to me. And I said, okay, I'll join and I'll kind of poke around. And so I did that. And when I did, and I started seeing people sharing and the love and the support and all of that, I started feeling, so, to go back, I have had emotional blockages in my life for probably like 30 something years, where I couldn't feel the highs and I couldn't feel the lows. Everything was kind of just like in the middle. And so sharing, that wasn't really my thing. And, definitely coming from big love was not my thing. And then in this group, something started happening, right? And Lindsay had got the book and we were both reading it together, and we would read it together every night, like aloud to each other. One of us would take turns. And in that process, I was able to become something I was never able to before. I tried multiple times in the past to read self-help books, listen to podcasts, do all of these things, do. And it always felt overwhelming. It always felt like, I always got to do more. I always got to just like keep adding to my plate, right? And so like as soon as I would hit a bump in the road, I would fall back to the comfortable area, to the area that I knew, which was not growing, not improving, not transforming, going back to where everything was just easy, right? So when I came into this group and we started reading the book, and I started being, kind of poking around at this point, I started realizing the way that being came to me was that I don't have to do anything. I have to remove the things that I'm being that aren't working for me. And then like I will just be and I'll feel a lot better. And it seems like a very simple thought, and it is a very simple thought, but it's mentally your brain does gymnastics to try to make it more complicated. And if you were in my shoes, and I started on that process, and my wife kept telling me, you got to make an intro post. And I was like, no. And then I was like, one day I was like, yeah. And I did. And the reception to it was way better than I would have ever thought. And that started the real unlocking of myself. And that started me really sharing more. Once I saw that post spoke to some people, I was like, wow, my story, some people are really affected by it. And so then I started sharing more deeper things. And it kind of snowballed from there. And then when I got that message, like from Eric, I think it was maybe after, I think it was probably after my first live, to be honest. And it just opened up the floodgates from that point, and kind of like a lot of things broke down as far as the blockage I had emotionally and stuff. And I just started letting it flow. That was it.
So powerful, Casey.
Just removing, right? So like I said, it was just removing all of the things that were holding me back that I was doing.
The imagery that was coming up for me that I find really interesting is, I think oftentimes when people are feeling emotionally blocked, there's this fear of allowing it to surface, because if it surfaces and other people see, they're going to reject me. Mm-hmm. So instead of expressing outward, I'm going to vacuum myself inward and shut. Mm-hmm. And it's that very processing of what if that prevents people from opening, but it's literally the exact opposite. What happened in your situation was, by opening, not once were you rejected, but instead you were making a difference.
Yeah.
And that making a difference had a reversal of the vacuum effect, where
Right.
people were now trying to suck you into their reality because it comforted them. And then all of a sudden now everything just starts opening and coming out.
Yeah. And it's funny because, like I said, that message, from Eric, I know myself, I know a lot of my, especially my men friends, right, have a problem with receiving. And so the receiving part of it was honestly, that was almost more difficult than the giving. And through this opening up and this putting out of it, like you said, right, there was almost this reverse vacuum, right? And all of a sudden things started coming to me, like people, like offers, like, yeah, it was crazy, and I can talk to that about just, the one day that really kind of was just like miracle after miracle. I had a call set up in the morning, two actually, one really early with Philip in Switzerland, then followed by Matt Smith. And that was how my day was supposed to start, right? And I didn't have really anything else going on after that. And it wasn't my first call with Philip, and it was just a wonderful, beautiful call, and it always was. And it aligned some things for me. And then right after that, I got on with Matt, and I expected the call to be about one thing. And he totally turned it around and walked me through one of the most beautiful meditations. I think he started the conversation with, after intros, he started it with, Casey, are you open to a miracle today? And that's exactly what happened, right? I told him, took a second, I paused for a second. I don't know why, but I did. And then I said, yes, I am. And so he walks me through this meditation. And the first thing he says to me was, what do you want from your mother? And I'm like, wow. Because the night before, I was just thinking about how I was having troubles with my mom not seeing me. And so, like, I hadn't really told anybody that except for my wife. And so he walks me through this. And at the end of it, it was just kind of like this release of the need that I had. And it was beautiful. And I left that, and I was kind of processing what had just happened. And I get a call from Alan Thompson saying, hey, man, we're a couple of us are heading over to Steve's. Do you want to come over to Steve's? And who's going to turn that down? So, so Lindsay and I like figure out like, who's going to watch the kids. And we head over to Steve's, and we're in this magical like experience over at Steve's house. And then I get back from that, and Eric had left me a message wanting to know about my day, and then wanting to assist me with something. And it was just, man, it was one thing after another. And it all stemmed from who I have been being in the group, who I've been being in life, and yeah, if you open yourself up, the world opens up to you. I truly believe and feel that.
What does it all mean to you?
I got a whole post that I was going to make on this one day. There's been this post I've been kind of toying with and haven't put out there. We'll talk about it right now instead. So my life, right? I always felt if I was a good person, right? That the universe or God or however you want to look at that, right? If you're not religious, whatever way you want to look at it, would take care of me, right? It's went that way, but how I term it now is half-ass being. So I was being certain ways that were really good and were who I wanted to be, but I wasn't like fully being. I was kind of half-assing it, and opportunities I would let go, and I wasn't committed to anything, but I was like committed to being a good person and being helpful and being there for people. And I was taken care of. I was never like in a really bad situation. I was never in really great, but I was always taken care of. What has happened since coming into the group and since embarking on this new journey of my life, this new chapter of my life, has shown me that if you're cognizant, right, if you're actually being, and you're being who you want to be, and you're coming to that the world just kind of opens up, right? And you're so aware of more opportunities that may have been there before, but you may have missed them. But you're not going to miss them now because you're putting it all out and you're taking it all in. So it really opens up the world to what it's meant to be, the full potential. And it's natural, it just flows.
What's your process when you find yourself not being who you want to be?
Yeah. So I think that's a big one, honestly. And I think it kind of gets overlooked sometimes because you don't see a lot of talk about that. But yeah, I still struggle. So you're talking 30 something years of being, right? So that's the thing is, whether you're choosing to be something or you're not choosing to be something, you're still going to be something. It just may not be what you want and what you would choose. And it all comes down to the conscious decision, right? If you have your document or whatever, like the speaking that to yourself, the maintaining of your garden. So there are still instances where I find myself not being the man that I want to be. That still happens. I'm still working through some things. What makes that easier? What makes that what my process is now is coming back to the things that I hold true for who I want to be, right? So as soon as you catch yourself, which is getting quicker and quicker every day, right? When I catch myself not being who I want to be, I pause and I fall back to who is it that I want to be? And okay, let's get back to that because right now that's not who I'm being. And I think that having whatever, your document or whomever's document, or not even that, just knowing who you want to be and catching yourself and being able to fall back and say, well, that's who I want to be, not who I'm being right now. Just having that to go on makes it a lot easier and makes it easy to bring yourself back to that spot.
How about the moments where it doesn't work?
Yeah.
How do you experience that? It's like, well, I'm doing it, but I'm still feeling heavy.
Yeah. I mean, that's a thing, right? That's definitely still a thing. And so I think the way that I've kind of handled that has been to grieve it. And it might not always be something that you perceive as like, when you hear grieve, you think a lot of people would associate sadness with it, right? It doesn't, in my mind, have to equal sadness. To me, it equals I'm grieving that I wasn't able to maintain my space and who I wanted to be. And so I give myself that for the appropriate amount of time. And then I really try to practice self-forgiveness, which is also huge and new and in my life. And then just move back forward, get back on track and start over again. But it's very important to do this self-forgiveness and to acknowledge that, because otherwise you're going to move forward still harboring whatever feelings you were having. And I think it's really important to clear that out before you move forward. Kind of similar to clearing, my mentals and my space before coming on a one-on-one call, right? In order to be fully present in the next moment, you got to get rid of what was there before.
Yeah, something honestly, like I realized yesterday, that is my next step of practicing self-forgiveness is it's easy for me to be aware of a negative thought. If I'm thinking I'm not good enough, okay, I'm aware of that, and I can show myself compassion and change that script. Mm-hmm. But for a while, what I wasn't aware of is the emotional states that I needed to show self-forgiveness, because I realized that there were times where shame would arise emotionally, but because there wasn't a thought per se that led to the feeling of shame, I didn't bring forgiveness into that. I didn't sit with, oh, I'm feeling shame. Can I be okay with that and love myself for having shame?
Yeah. Yeah.
And without that awareness, it was building and being left untamed.
Yeah. Yeah. With a feeling. I don't know that I've thought of that. So I thank you for bringing that to my attention. Yeah. It's definitely a lot harder with a feeling than a conscious thought to really kind of dive into that. And how do you forgive? As you don't feel, I think it's tricky because you almost don't feel like you need forgiveness because it's a feeling. But then it's like, no, you do. You're right. Yeah. That's a great thought.
And it's so easy to skip it. It's like, oh, I'm feeling shame right now. I told myself I was going to do more creating today, but I ended up doing more consuming.
Right.
And I'm feeling shame. And for me, at least, it was, okay, so what, how can I do something right now that would lead to me feeling that I'm creating? And if I were to do that, I never gave the presence to the shame that was there. Mm-hmm. And of course, as we see this new dialogue from reading The Ultimate Coach, it's, well, instead of focusing on how do I create and do, if I stay with that shame, if I show forgiveness and love to that shame, it'll be very curious to see what happens next in my actions.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that is wonderful.
And here's something that just came to me too. I think a reason why we focus on, well, what could I do now? Like, how can I create? Is it's a bit of controlling. There's certainty there. There's a false sense of certainty. Okay, I could do something. It's very controlling behavior. Whereas, whoa, can I really sit in just being with this emotional state and trusting that that will lead to a result that I hopefully desire?
Yeah, oh, wow. Yeah, that's a lot of this is kind of right. It's your faith that things are going to, if you're being who you want and you are being self-forgiveness in those moments, that it's going to lead you to what it is that you truly want. And there's been a lot of posts and lives, and I want to say, I think it was Townsend that did one the other day that was about how, commitment comes first, right? I think that's what it was. And it's the same, right? Your commitment to being is going to yield the results, right? I used to always be big on, I wouldn't do something prior to this. I wouldn't do something unless I could guarantee the results. So I wouldn't commit to doing anything unless I could guarantee, and it's a control thing. But now through this, I'm being shown, no, that, when you commit, when you're being the person that's like committing, the results are going to happen. Like, so if you commit, right, to your self-forgiveness of that feeling, you're having faith that it's going to yield the result you want, and it most likely will. And man, the feelings thing, that's thrown me for a loop right now. I hadn't thought of it in those terms.
Let's just pause for a second. Yeah. Let's just pause in silence and give space to see what comes.
Yeah, man, it made me think of my feelings of frustration that I've faced recently, and how I tried to handle them from the controlling way you were speaking about, and what I could do differently, and how I could just be in that for a moment, forgive, let go, and move forward. And that's a whole new process I'm going to be working on. And I'm going to be starting after this call here, man. It's amazing.
What came up for me in that silence was, I was like, holy shit, I didn't see it. But as I told you, podcasting is new for me.
Yeah.
And I'm realizing I see this in other dynamics as well. But my internal experience is, if I'm present and I'm with you, I get a personal hoorah. If I say something that sounds good, I get a personal hoorah. But if I ever am not present for a moment, there comes the whip. If I'm not coming off perfectly authentic, if there's ever a moment where I'm questioning my authenticity, there's the whip.
Yeah.
As opposed to being here from a place of, I don't have to be perfectly authentic.
Right.
I'm discovering authenticity. If there's a moment where I notice inauthenticity, can I just be curious about that? And can I forgive myself for being inauthentic and love myself and know that everything's okay?
Yeah.
And same thing with the not being present for a moment, which is really funny because when it happens, I'm like, oh shit, I hope his sentence isn't over now.
It's this reminds me of the analogy that was in the book, or I believe it was Steve, about the factory is never going to get to zero issues, right? There's always going to be, like when factories have the no injuries in this many days, right? Like, you're never going to get to zero defects. You're never going to be perfect, right? There will always be those moments of like, oh man, I wasn't present for a second, or like, was I just inauthentic? The goal is not ever, the goal, maybe the ideal, maybe zero, but the goal should be improvement. And know that there's always going to be moments where, I get frustrated, right, over something that I maybe shouldn't. As long as like I'm working and cognizant and making those less, that's ideal. Getting to zero is like most likely unattainable in a lot of things. And if you make that your goal, it's going to just lead to kind of feelings you probably don't want. So yeah, it's I think even in the inauthenticities or the moments that you're missing, that you're not present, I think it's like still truly authentic to that moment, right? Because it's you're here, you're in this, and that's just what happened in that moment, right? It's not. I
need the inauthenticity to discover authenticity.
Yeah.
Something that was coming up for me, I was like, I always love it. Like, a moment of realization. That to me is how I know I'm on course. As long as I have a moment of realization, like one a week, we're doing fine.
Yeah. Exactly.
In the past, people would say to me, Ross, you have such high expectations of yourself. And with you, what I believe I just realized is, it's not that I have high expectations of myself. It's that I didn't allow low acceptance of myself. It was about acceptance, not expectation.
Yeah.
Expectation is like the branch, the root is acceptance. Because if we're accepting ourselves, then there isn't any space for expectation. Right. That just dissolves.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because that gets, so for me, right, and one of the things that actually, the lack of presence or whatever you were just talking about is I don't always look at the camera.
I never look at the camera.
That always, I know I'm always looking at you, but then I'll look like over here and it's like, damn, I got to keep looking this way. but it's not just, acceptance is the root, right? But I think it was DA that brought it up after the event, right? It's like a baseline, right? And so before, your root, your baseline was at one level. And I'll speak about myself. After the event, after being active in the group, like my baseline, my roots are now up higher, right? They're a different like vibration. They're a different frequency. So now my new state of being isn't where it used to be, right? There's still no expectations, but what you're accepting of yourself can change, right? I used to accept the minimum from myself, and I was okay with that. And that was where I was at in life. And a lot of my blockages led to that. But in coming into this, right, it raised like my acceptance now of myself is a lot higher. And I have to practice, radical self-forgiveness when I do allow myself to fall below that new baseline, because I'm still not there with everything yet. And when that arises, it does get back to the feelings that brings up, right? And the whip of you're not being like who you say you are. And it's like, well, give me a second. And and catching that and then practicing that self-forgiveness, because you're not going to get to zero defaults or defects or whatever, it's like, go ahead.
The line in there, just give yourself a second, was so perfect, because it's making me think about the times where I'm not being who I want to be in this moment. And I'm now trying to force myself into being the way I want to be. And that is just creating the energy of resistance, which is creating even more separation from the state of being that I want to be in. And it's like, just give yourself a break for a second. If you got to be a way you don't want to be for a moment, just be that way. Take a breath and then try to shift.
Right. And like I said, if it's a state that causes you, some sort of like negative feelings, when that's done, focus on the self-forgiveness for a few minutes. Let it go, move on. It was a moment in life. It's gone now, right? It's now a lesson. And you just want to move forward from that and start being who you do want to be.
What does being mean to you?
Yeah, it's kind of, it means multiple things, honestly, right? So at one level, there's the unconscious being, which is that's just kind of how you feel you are every day, right? It's like, and it's true. It's who you are being every day. It's just what you're putting out there into the world. When you create your document, when you create, your declarations, and you start tending your garden by repeating those to yourself and by living those, now you have a conscious being, right? You're conscious of these things that you're committed to, and that's where you're coming from. And the more you live by that, and the more you remind yourself of that, the more your default being becomes that. But then there's the other side of what does it mean to me? It means that I'm choosing what I'm giving the world, right? My conscious being is choosing to be, as Philip would say, unlimited, right? Unlimited. Mm-hmm. I want to be unlimited in the love I give the world. I want to be unlimited in so many areas of what I'm bringing to the world, where before, when it was unconscious and I didn't even have the thought and I wasn't thinking about it, I was very limited in what I was giving my fellow people. and what I was giving myself, honestly. My acceptance, my baseline at that point was so much lower. And so being to me means consciously choosing the life you're going to live and what you're going to bring to yourself and to everybody.
Greatly resonate.
And it's just amazing what that, what that does for others and what that does in turn for yourself. And to see it, this group is a very quick place to see the results of it, right? So this is like the, like kind of the sandbox, the test, like where you're going to receive love and support, right? But, try being that same person in the world if you haven't. I've been trying that, right? Because it's easy in the group, but in the world, when I'm trying to be unconditional love to a woman in the coffee shop, you can't be attached to the results that come from that because, she, at that point, she was having a difficult day, and I pulled her aside, and not pulled her aside, but I said, excuse me, I overheard you were having a difficult day. Is there anything I can do to assist you? And when you ask that to a random person out in the wild, you might not get the same response you get in the group. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't.
You got?
Whew, man, it was just a strange look. And it was a strange look. She definitely looked bewildered. You can tell that a lot of people aren't expecting kindness and just unconditional love and support out in the world. And, it made me sad for a moment, right? Because I was offering this woman truly anything I could have done for her in my means. And from the look I got, it's unexpected. And a lot of times it puts people off, but that doesn't mean that I'm not going to keep trying, because what happens in our group, I would love to see that be what happens out in the world, right? And it's only going to happen through example and the ripples that we talk about, right? So I don't know, maybe that lady later on that day kind of reflected, and maybe she then was more than she would have been to someone else, or maybe it just cheered her up a little bit. Even though she wasn't able to hear it and receive it. She wasn't able to receive it in that moment, right? I wasn't able to receive a lot in the moment when I first joined the group. I wasn't able to, and I didn't take people's kindness at face value. Now I do. So, we need to be the examples. Those of us who have started this path and are able to see this and see what it does and see what it can do, need to be the examples. And I truly believe like the ripples will kind of affect and change people. It just might not be as quick as it happens in our little group.
How do you feel you've been doing with consistency, where you find that you have these highs of really being connected, really coming from love, really sharing, really being the version of yourself that you want to be, and these plateaus, if you will?
Yeah, it gets more consistent. Some of the things like I spoke about, right, kind of touch on this point. It goes back to that tending the garden analogy, where the more that I'm speaking to myself who I want to be, the more that I'm practicing who I want to be, the more consistent it becomes. But there have been days when I've felt too busy or been too preoccupied or what have you, the kids are going crazy or whatever. And you forget because this is still new to me, right? Some of you have been in it longer, so you may be further along, but to me, it's still new. And I come from 30 something years of not. And every day gets a little more consistent. but there are moments that I forget, and I'm not tending the garden, and I'm not reminding myself of who I want to be. And those are the days that at the end of the day, it's like, okay, we need a lot of self-forgiveness today. And tomorrow is a new day. The next moment's a new moment. And you start by reminding yourself where where you want to be, who you want to be all over again. And just keep doing it.
Can I share something funny with you?
Yeah.
There was a moment where I was like, where'd that question come from? And that question came from a judgment of, how consistent have you been in being, Ross?
Yeah. That's man. Yeah, that one's come up for me a lot of times. Yeah. The thoughts still come, man. Yeah, the judgments, especially self. I've told a lot of people in the one-on-one calls, and I think in some of my posts, but it's difficult. And, I thank God for my wife. She's amazing, and she walks me through a lot, but she's also got to put up with a lot, right? So the judgments that we have towards ourselves, those still come up a lot. And I find that in my closest relationships, my wife, my children, my family, it's where those thoughts sneak in the most, right? The people that you are like, as soon as the sentence starts, I know where this is going, right? It's hard. It's hard to sometimes keep the open mind. The more you know somebody, to come with it in full presence and keep those inner voices out. The more you know somebody, the closer you are, because you already feel like you know where they're going with something. And that's an area where talking about the consistency, right? And the tending of the garden, I know that it's improving immensely because I'm catching it so much faster now. And I'm, it's easier to also practice the forgiveness of self when I know that I'm catching it faster and I'm improving. And so easy in conversations with people that you don't have a deep relationship with yet, because you're growing that and you're open and you're like excited to hear about them. And yeah, it's harder to get to that same place with someone that you know so intimate.
I'd be curious. I absolutely agree with that. But a curiosity that I have of like a piece of discernment. And is it about the newness of these relationships that you're making? Or is it about the fact that you're meeting like-minded people? And that the resistance with older relationships is that there isn't that like-mindedness the way that there is with new people that you're meeting.
I think that, so for myself, in some of my relationships, that's 100% true. It gets difficult when it's with my wife because she actually is, in my opinion, right? And this is I guess kind of a judgment, right? I see her as farther along in this journey because she's been about personal growth and becoming the best person she could be as long as I've known her. And I was, dragged along begrudgingly for a long time. And because I was the person that was like, oh, you don't like me how I am, and then kind of like the F word. And I was like, I'm a good person. What are you talking about? And I wasn't about personal development, man. I really wasn't until coming into being. Like, it's been crazy. And so back to the question, right? I think that's what you said was true for a lot of the situations, but with my wife, it's kind of different. It's just, I think there's still, like some things that maybe are in me that are still making that a little bit difficult, that I haven't maybe addressed or looked at fully yet. just old feelings, right? It's easy when it's easy when it's like the physical thoughts, but it's not when it's like the feelings. And we've been working through that stuff, and it's been amazing, man. It's been amazing. I can't, I've mentioned it before, and I can't even tell you, like, that's the one thing that I could never repay Steve or Amy or Alan or anyone in this group, really, is what it's given to me in my marriage. We literally were talking separation not long before joining the group, like, and it wasn't the first time. And since then, like, it's just been all like growing towards each other. And so many of the things that were issues before just dissolved almost overnight. And yeah, I mean, I told that, directly to Steve at the event. There's a photo of us just like holding each other's shoulders, right? And like, I told him in that moment, like, just looking right in his eyes and being just as present as possible. And I said, look, man, I don't have $200,000 to work with you. But if I did, and all I knew I would get out of it is my marriage being fixed, I would pay you that money gladly. And I meant every minute of that, every second of that. Like, yeah, it like saved a marriage. And, what it's becoming is just so amazing. And I can't repay that ever.
How would you describe your marriage today and describe it 6 months ago?
Man, like 6 months ago, there was like commitment to each other, there was commitment to each other, but it was like, there was always tension. Like I said, my wife was always about personal development, growth, positive transformation. And I was about, I'm good enough right where I am. And those two things don't really work together. Like, we have big love for each other, but those two things don't really work together. And, it's kind of like, vinegar and water, oil and water. It just doesn't, they can sit right next to each other, but they're not going to mix. And, and now it's just all like positive transformation. Like I said, a lot of the issues melted away. A lot of the big issues melted away. Now it's kind of working through, like I kind of alluded to a second ago, my individual feelings that I have, and hers as well. I'm not going to speak too much for her, but about the past, right? Because that you need to forgive and move forward and let go. But when you have years of in some ways animosity, in some ways frustration, you have all of that happened over time. It's not as easy to just say, I forgive, let go of those feelings, they're gone, right? Like, no, those feelings are still there. And in being every day, right, those are the things, when those come up, that I really got to go back to my document, right? I really got to fall back to, this is who I want to be, even though these feelings are surfacing. Because that is just the lesson of where I came from. That's not who I'm being now. It's not who I want to be now. And it's not what we're working towards in the future. Now we have a more combined vision. Now we're like peanut butter and jelly, as opposed to, oil and water. So yeah, it's brilliant. It's not to say that there's not issues. There are still things that we work through. What I would say is the difficult conversations last a lot less time now, right? And the forgiveness is a lot quicker now. And the moving forward is a lot quicker now. And there's a lot less of it now. So it feels a lot more cohesive and a lot more of a loving team now than it did in the past.
so happy for you, Casey.
I appreciate that.
I think this is a pretty powerful place to end our conversation.
Yeah.
Before we do, any final things you would like listeners to hear?
I still put it out there that I know I've been taking a lot less calls lately, but the connect calls, everyone should be getting on that. I'm really big on what they've done for me.
What's and what I've seen. Call?
So I put it out there in a couple of my posts, and it kind of grew from there. I wasn't expecting what happened. Like a connect call, I would say is just, if there's anyone that you find interesting, their posts, a post specifically, reach out to them and just get like a 30-minute call set up with them. And just like this, right? Just like this with you and I right now, there's no agenda. There's no coaching, none of that. You just kind of have a call with someone that you find interesting and be open to whatever happens and be fully present with them. And I say, like, almost every single time magic happens. And I am a big believer in that, because I put that out there, and within a month I took 40 calls, like 40 something calls. It was a lot. Maybe I should have been scheduling a little bit better in the beginning, but I was taking 3 a day sometimes. And sometimes they were half hour, sometimes they were an hour, sometimes they were an hour and a half. And every one of them touched me. And the transformations that I saw in myself and that I saw in others after our call were nothing short of amazing. So if I leave this with anything, it's just, continue connecting with people. Anyone that you feel drawn to, I would say to reach out and connect with them. There's a reason you're feeling drawn to it.
And experience the miracle of pure human connection, because that's all we're talking about.
Yeah. And how much of that has, been taken from us in the last few years, right? And now you're in this safe place of like, this is the best place for it, man. It's brilliant, and everyone's coming to it from such a great place. So if I can leave with anything, it's that. And, just boil it down to who you really want to be and start practicing. Life will open up. It'll be amazing.
Casey, thank you so much for being in this experience with me. Can't wait to see you soon.
Yeah, I appreciate you. I appreciate you taking the time and space to be with me. Thank you.
Lots of love, brother. Peace out.
All right, I love you, brother.
Thank you for listening. If you know someone who would benefit from today's conversation, please share this podcast with them. Also, we invite you to visit theultimatecoachbook.com so you can continue your personal exploration of being. There you will find links to join our wonderful community, get your own copy of the Ultimate Coach book, and more. Simply go now to www.theultimatecoachbook.com. That's www.theultimatecoachbook.com. The link is also available in the show notes. We appreciate your support. Be blessed. Be you.